Hello, everybody, and welcome to Table Talk with
Hello.
my guest hosts, Michael Wostbrock and Jay Little, and I'm Heather Newton, the lead organizer of Protospiel Online. This week, our topic
Are we
is
are we doing interjections? Should we say who we are?
interjections. Oh, well, I said who you are. What else?
They
Oh,
don't
I
need to
don't.
know anything else about you than your name.
Nope, that's it.
He's the pretty face.
Yeah, I'm just here to bring the views in.
Right. More specifically, both Michael and Jay are moderators of Protospiel Online, and Michael is our kind of sitting in for a newer designer in the scene, and Jay is a professor at a university about board games. So has been in the industry a while. And this week we'll be talking about 3-player games or games that work well at 3 players. They probably, not very many games are only 3-player games, but some definitely work better at 3-player than other counts.
And it was really strange when I saw this on the schedule because it's something that as designers, I've talked to a number of designers about 3 players in particular. As Heather mentioned, there aren't a lot of games that are specifically and only for 3 players, but you'll see games for 2 to 4 players, for 2 to 6 players. But I'll tell you, as a designer, 3 players has been for me the most difficult player count to design for. It's really, really difficult.
It's super interesting too because for a long time, traditional games just left that player count out, right? Like there were a lot of 2-player games in the abstract matchup world, and then again we've talked about things like chess, Mancala, Go, and that sort of game. And then in the card game world, you had 2-player games and you had 4-player games, which matched up people in pairs. And there was this gap for 3-player games until I assume until fairly recently, where we just started saying 2 to 4, and we would just make it work in the middle, but maybe not always super elegantly.
I mean, even Risk and Monopoly, have a range of players. Not a lot of fun to play 2 players, usually better 4 to 5, but it can also be a 3-player experience. But it is a different experience than when you have more people around the table.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, now that we've hijacked that little introduction of yours, Heather, where do you want to go from here?
What do you think it is about them that makes them so hard to design, or what that player count that makes it so hard to design a game that works at that player count?
There are 2 things, and Michael, you know what they are as a newer designer. I don't know how many
Sure.
3-player games or games that can be played with 3 players you've worked on.
Yeah, let me see how wrong I can get this. So one thing that comes to mind is with a 3-player game, you've got a weird power balance where in a 2-player game, you can design systems and mechanics that are either summative or 0-sum. And so if you do something to hurt one player, it's the same as doing something to advantage yourself. But with 3 players, it feels like it's harder to build those systems so that they interact fairly. And so now attacking one player, it doesn't matter if they're not actually competing for you in first place, and so you have to think about how all of that balances out. I don't know. That seems like the most obvious thing to me. Is there's now 3 people playing King of the Hill, and the power dynamic isn't the same as with 2 players, where what you do to one person is equally fair. And I see this in multiplayer games where players will just be uncomfortable targeting someone with a single target effect, and they try and fairly distribute the hate between players. Or they're the players that try and burn down one person, and then they'll have to they'll have to explain why they're doing it. It's because the game tells them to, and they have to rationalize it. So I think that's the main thing that comes to mind. I'd be curious to hear, is that true at all? And also what else? Because I haven't really thought a lot about it.
The one thing that you mentioned that was really interesting is just targeting effects, and a lot of people who want to spread them around so that everybody remains in the game as long as possible, rather than what would be a better strategy is annihilate one person, so now you're competing against fewer players if your true goal is to win rather than have a fun communal experience. But one of Michael's comments, I think, actually kind of encapsulated 2 of the things that I think 3-player game design is especially tricky around. And the first is king making. So for those who aren't familiar, it's toward the end of the game when one person is unfairly in charge of determining the winner. So Heather and I might be tied for points, and Michael has one action left on the last round of the game, and he has to attack either Heather or I. And whoever he attacks will lose, and the other person will win. And that's a really awkward position to put Michael in. Some people will just say, nope, we're going to just stop here, or they don't want to, target people that way because it seems like a flaw of the game that it backed them into this corner where I can't win, yet I have to choose the winner. And then I think on another issue is if it doesn't kind of lead to a point there where two people are so close with one person trailing is a runaway leader problem, where one person who gets an early lead that gives them the means to score more points, generate more resources, create a more efficient engine. And as soon as you get that one advantage, it just keeps on building, and the advantage gap starts to grow greater and greater. So even though you have two people nipping at your heels who are trying ostensibly to catch up with you, you're just so far ahead, and all of your positive moves are going to put you that much further that it's harder for people behind to really catch up, and they can't necessarily interact with each other because that's just going to make them lose faster. They really need to target that lead player. And sometimes that's not fun and it's not effective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've heard of king making. I don't think I've ever had someone actually explain it to me, but I've definitely experienced that in games. And yeah, it feels bad. And you're trying to make good experiences or meaningful experiences when you make games, and having the person that performed the worst or lost the most in the game then decide the winner. I don't think that's what you should be going for in a game, and so you want to avoid that.
Is there
it's really
a level at which, or like, is there a counter argument to the king making that if if you're playing a game that has that in it, there's some part of the strategy to putting yourself in the position to be king made,
What's really interesting about that is what I have found, or at least kind of where my mind goes, is the idea that if you're the one put in that situation, your decision isn't necessarily going to be made tactically because I'm already losing, and it's largely irrelevant who then wins if I'm going to be coming in last anyway. Now, it would be different if I'm playing against Heather and Michael, and if I attack Heather, I'd come in second place, but if I attack Michael, I'd come in third place, because then at least there's some way of feeling I'm getting some sort of Pyrrhic victory by coming in second instead of third.
Yeah.
But, sometimes we'll take a look at and make decisions that aren't rational, but it's who pitched in for pizza, who showed up late to the game, whose house are we playing at? And sometimes you start making decisions based on completely irrelevant things to the game. It might be who beat you up last time at, the last game night. If Michael won last week a lot, then I'm going to go after Michael and give Heather the win just because of something outside of the game itself, but is still part of like the meta experience that we accumulate over time, particularly when you play with the same group of people. You'll tend to get certain play patterns that are almost like inside jokes with your group. A long time ago when I was in St. Louis, the game group would start setting up the game and somebody would invariably say, it doesn't matter who wins as long as Jay loses. Right. And it was just kind of going into that. If you're caught between going after Phil and going after Jay, you go after Jay. And it was lighthearted and it was a friendly poke and it made me try to play better all the time. But that's not something that at a sit-down convention like a Protospiel Online or a face-to-face where I would be able to draw those sorts of inside jokes, references, or trends out. So it would feel arbitrary.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think it depends. I think how that experience is perceived depends, like you said, on factors external to the game. It depends on your relationships with the players and how familiar you are with them, what relationship you have, what you're comfortable with. But I think it's almost always awkward if you're playing with strangers and you're put in a position where there's no game advantage to you choosing a winner. You lose, you come in third no matter what. And Heather, you made a point about, well, is there a a metagame you play where if you think you're going to be in that position, you're trying to gain leverage to be chosen. Were you the nice player all game? And it's kind of fun, and I've seen people do that, but it's still strange because there's no tactical game advantage to letting the nice player win. It's external. It's about, I developed this external to the game relationship to you, and so I should be rewarded in the game for this. And I think, again, that can be really fun as long as you know the people and everyone's comfortable with it. It can be really uncomfortable if one or more of the players are outside of the group. And so I do think it's something you should at least avoid or approach with caution when putting it into your game. So, but I guess the question is, how do you avoid that in a 3-player game?
Before we do that, there's another thing about like the whole social contract issue. I'd be curious what both of your takes are on this. But should the person who is in that king-making seat, is their job to reward the person who played best during the game and say, you know what, Heather, you did a great job. You generated the most resources. You kicked my butt. Congratulations. I'm going to crown you the victor. Or is my goal that Heather's in the lead and I don't want the person in the lead to win, so I'm going to sabotage Heather at the 11th hour, hamstring her, and then let Michael eke into the victory. And so that's an interesting mindset too. And my students tend to be split about 50-50 as to what they would do in that situation. Do they reward the person that they think played better, or do they use this opportunity to kind of beat them back and admonish them and give the other person the victory? How would you two handle it? Heather?
I think it would depend. I would probably not do the same thing every single time. I think it would depend on people's behavior for me more than what, like, their behavior at the table or the situation. Like, if it's a new player, I might want them to win so they like games more, for example. Yeah. It's
interesting, the choices that we make that aren't necessarily based on game state, but it's based on fun, especially the new player issue that you bring up, Heather. There are a lot of games that I've sandbagged just because I want to open up opportunities or point things out or help explain something to a newer player. And I don't consider that playing poorly. I'm playing differently. I'm playing to instruct and to showcase rather than playing, straight out to win. What about you, Michael, in that situation?
I'd give the victory to the player that didn't win as often. And so that requires for them to be in my social group and to be someone I play games with more often, because I want to see everyone have a chance at winning. I want to win as much as I can because, like, striving for excellence in a game is fun. I like that competition. But if I was in the position where choosing someone else, I think I would almost always let the person that wins games less in our circle win the game. And for the reasons Heather said, I want them to keep playing. If you're that person that almost never wins and then you're about to and you have victory snatched from you based on a decision that somebody else made and not your own performance, to me, that would feel terrible. And I think I might lose interest in playing. So I think my motivation will be driven not at all by that game, but by the desire to continue playing games with those people.
Or if somebody is more of, like, if you think it's going to make them feel bad, like one of them is more easygoing and one of them is more uptight about whether or not they win or lose, or they feel worse about it when they lose, I might protect them from losing.
I would make that person lose every time because they have a lesson to learn.
Yeah, maybe.
Which is to take it easier.
All of us use feel, and we're talking about the socio-emotional part of it rather than, essentially we're here to win, we're here to play. Yes, we're here to play fair, but at the end of the day, we all want to win. I really think we all want to compete because we can't all expect to win, but I at least want to feel competitive. I feel like I gave it my best effort, or I learned something along the way, or I won't make that mistake again. And sometimes we can consider those little things along the way as a victory, even if it's not the winner of the game. So
I like that. We have to compete.
I like that too. That's a really good way to think about it, because I've played plenty of games where I haven't won and I don't think I'm going to win, and I still enjoyed it because I got to compete. And I've played games where win or lose, I didn't enjoy it because I felt like I didn't have a lot of say in the outcome. And I think that didn't feel like competing.
Well, and to go
I
back
just got
to
into
like,
an. Oh, go ahead.
people who are sad when they lose, again, it depends on their behavior. So if there's somebody who is rude about it and they kind of pout and whine when they lose, well, I see what you're saying. Maybe they have a lesson to learn. But there's some people that they're not rude about it, but I can tell they're sad. Like, I'm sort of, I don't know if everybody has this, but I can sort of feel emotions radiating off of people.
I have a 6-year-old like this, and I have been in a kingmaker position with my 6-year-old, and I've gone both ways. There have been times when I need her to know that she doesn't always win everything, because she will take that and get an attitude with it. And so I can teach that lesson gently, and usually with the opportunity to play again and let her succeed. But I've also absolutely let her win a game that she had no position winning, because I didn't want her to be sad, and I wanted her to have an experience that she enjoyed and would make her play again. So I see your side of it too, Heather, and I agree.
What I love so much about gaming is neither of those approaches is wrong or right, because it's situational. And what may work in one session or for one person probably won't work in a different session and with different people. That's what I love so much. You can play the same game over and over again, but if you play it with different people, or you play it with the same people on a different day, you know, if I just had a lousy day at work, I'm going to come to the table with a different attitude and a different approach than if I'm walking on sunshine. It's just, we can't help but let those things affect us and our attitude, not only toward the game, but the people at the table. So,
yeah.
I haven't played Ankh myself, so it wasn't on my list of things to talk about here. But as you were discussing this, like this moment where there's somebody far behind and there's nothing they can do about the people who are still competing, I don't know if either of you have played Ankh. I've read and heard about it, that there's something going on where there's a moment in the middle of the game where somebody who's losing combines with the person who's winning, or something like that. So
I have seen games.
That's an example of a game that tries to fix it. Yeah.
I've seen some games where you score based on the person ahead of you in line. Republic of Rome, or there was a game I just played at Geekway where, like, if I was in last place and Michael was in second, I'd actually score points based on Michael's position. And if Heather was in first place, Michael would score points based on Heather's position. And then Heather would get a bonus for being in first place. So it kind of pulls you along. Or there are some games that have a reset, like in, I think it's Amun-Re, when the river floods and things kind of reset and you could try to make a comeback. Or in other games that have stages, sometimes the person in last place will get the opportunity to go first, draft first, or have the ability to act and take advantage of the situation as a way to kind of catch up.
I just played, we talked about it last week, but I played Quacks of Quedlinburg for the first time, and that's a game that gives you a advantage based on your distance from the player in the lead. So, like, the further behind you are, the more of an advantage you get on any given turn. And that's not exactly the same as combating kingmaking, but it has this thing where it rubber bands players together, and it does it in a way that doesn't drag the leader down. It just pulls everyone up towards them. And for a luck-based push your luck kind of random game without too much heavy decision making, I thought that played really, really well. And it helps you avoid being in a position where you're way behind.
Well, and also when I saw this this on the list, I thought, well, this one is harder for me to engage with, because I feel like I mostly play 2-player with Will, or we're in a big group of people and I'm playing bigger player count games, and it's not very common that I play just with 3 people. So it's harder for me to know. And also I realized, like, well, I'll introduce this game, Glooks, as kind of the game that taught me that a game can be really, really different feeling with 2 people or 3 people. Because I played this at a con with one friend and Will, and it was hilarious. It's a very abstract game. You see those chips are just, they're like 6-sided dice. Like the 1 has a 6 on the back, the 3 has a 4 on the back, and the 5 has a 2 on the back. And you're just placing these in this grid it's been a while since I've played it because it's not very fun at 2, but just placing them, and it's very mathy. Like, if you go this far, I can block you if I play a 2 there, blah, blah, blah. And it was like so snipey and funny, and for something just totally abstract when we played it with 3 or 4. But with 2, it's completely bland. It's not fun.
So what made it more fun at 3 or more player counts? Because you said it was more snipey, which made me think about player targeting. Was it just that you have more than one option when you're choosing things like that?
Yeah, I think maybe if it was 2 people, it was just 2 combat. It was like meh, 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 like blow for blow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if there was another person in there, yeah, you could start kind of. Well, and it wasn't even like picking on one person because they were in the lead. They are in your way. That person's in your way. So there's something that guides you towards who to attack in a way that was kind of fun. And like you're like, of course I'm going to do this. Sorry. You know what I mean? You're like, shake my fist at you. So I've learned from that. Like if we get a game that we play just the 2 of us and it's not terrible. Like sometimes we play a game and we're like, I don't like that. I just don't like it. I know I don't like it. But sometimes it's like, that was interesting. There was something to it, but it was kind of flat. It wasn't really that good. I won't decide to get rid of it until I can play it with 3 or 4.
What's interesting is, speaking of games that feel very, very different based on the number of people, would be Reiner Knizia's Beowulf. And it's basically a game of retelling the Beowulf epic poem, but basically you're maneuvering through the different parts of the story and drafting at different locations. And everything that you can draft is hard printed on the board rather than like an array of cards in front of you. But there's clearly something that is best for you at that moment, and then going down the row. So with 4 or 5 people, it's really, really competitive. And it shrinks the number of options that are available. So in a 4-player game, there are only 4 options, etc. So at 3 players, it's usually 1 good option and 2 terrible options, or a low, medium, and high, or 2 good and 1. But regardless, it's the person who came out first that is always going to benefit, and the person who came out last is always going to be behind. There's never a situation where all 3 of them are beneficial. And it's a lot different because there are more shades of what good and bad for me means when we're playing with 4 or 5 players than if we're just playing with 3 players, because then it's pretty obvious, not only to me, but to the other players if they choose to hate draft instead of just draft for themselves.
Okay, so are you saying that you think Beowulf is a fun game at 3 players? Because you have it nearby.
It doesn't do it well.
Oh, interesting.
I brought it out because I was really, really thinking about it, and the drafting system kind of influenced my design for 3 Years of War. But the more I was looking at it, the more I'm like, you know what? You didn't really enjoy this with 3. It was really when you had 4 or 5 and you were able to choose out of all of these, because there's a push your luck element to it as well. So being rewarded for knowing when other people might fold. And there's just not as much of it with 3 as you get with a larger group.
Speaking of good games that, at least in my experience, struggled to deal with a 3-player count, I was thinking I could talk about this and maybe unpack why and what we could learn from it. I've played about 25 playthroughs of Through the Ages with exactly 3 people. It's the only game that I have tested that much because me and 2 friends of mine, we played it in person, we liked it, and so we got the app, and we just had like an ongoing weekly game going for a long time. And so I have heavily stress tested that game at 3 players, and it is fun. We obviously went back to it many times. It's essentially a civilization, build your empire game where you start with low economy, low might, low resources, and you're trying to build up these different towers through the phase of the game, get a stronger military presence, and your strength matters with respect to the strength of your neighbors. Think Seven Wonders, but much more complicated. But the idea of the strength of your neighbors changes how strong you should be. Economy works a similar way. And a lot of the game is about amassing things that will net you points based on your position in different areas you've developed by the end of the game. Love the game, fantastic game, but it struggles from one specific thing when you play with it with 3 players, as much as I have, and that is it. Essentially, it devolves into a 2-player game at 3 players almost every single playthrough. So some of the scoring mechanisms in this game, quite a few of them, rely on the distance in some attribute, we'll say military might, between you and a neighbor. So you can take your might and attack one other player, and the stronger you are than them, the more points you get. And so the game lends itself at 3 players to a pile-on effect, where if you can get a little bit of position above someone else and you attack them, that puts them in a bad spot. And I think good game design would incentivize the 3rd player to attack you because you're winning now, to pull you back towards the middle. But instead, they get more points if they also attack the player that just lost. And then on that player's turn, they're trying to get back to where the 2 of you are in relative strength. And if they can't do that, another round goes by, and the 2 leading players will both again attack the bottom player and basically grind that person into the dust until they are so far behind that there's no point bothering with their score anymore, and then the other 2 players finish the game. And
they're just leeching off of them. That's interesting, because like 7 Wonders and other neighbor games, where instead of worrying about the entire table or being able to interact even with the entire table, you're basically looking to the player to your left, player to your right, whether it is to check resources or unit interactions or card effects. But I have found that a lot of the games that I've looked at that work well with 3 players are either games that are kind of solitaire alone games, like a Yahtzee or some other roll and write game, or something like Fits, which is a Tetris game that Random Kinesia did. And a card will flip up that shows us a polyomino, and we all have to place it on our board at the same time. So we're all playing solitaire at the same time, and that's a 3-player game.
Yeah.
Or neighbor games like you just mentioned, or 7 Wonders. And
I should clarify, it's the Through the Ages is not a neighbor game. Other
just
other
in 3 players it does?
Well, yeah, because it's other opponents. What I meant was that your military might only matters in how much stronger you are than other players.
Relative to them. Gotcha.
As opposed to relative to some game state or board condition. So if other players don't develop military, there's not much incentive for you to either. But unlike 7 Wonders, which only cares about your neighbors, so you're kind of playing a 3-player game where it's just you and these 2 people you care about. In Through the Ages, it's all players.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say like 7 Wonders is you're playing a 3-player game, but everybody is playing a slightly different 3-player game at the same time,
right?
And they do all interact. Village Pillage does that too. I'm trying to think of some other games that have that feature, but I really like that because it is a really good way to be able to scale games, and it's a easier way to determine like relative effects and relative power, because I don't need to worry about how powerful is this against every single player. I just need to worry about how powerful is this against 2 other potential values. Yeah, so Village Pillage that Heather just pulled up, I really love. It's basically you have a hand of cards that represent different villagers, and you place one between you and the player to your left, and one between you and the player to your right. After everybody has placed them face down, you reveal them, and then you compare them. So if I sent a thief after your farmer, I'm going to steal everything that you grew. But if I sent out a thief and you put out your guard, then the guard's going to catch me and you're going to get something. So there's this trying to outwit your opponents during this, and you get more and more character units that you can use that have slight twists to the whole formula. But there are 4 different character types. So when you're playing with the player on your left and right, you know that at least 2 of the character types aren't going to be used. So Michael just raided me last turn. Is he going to raid me again this turn? I'm going to put my guard up. But if he isn't attacking me, then that guard was wasted and I don't get any resources. So Heather's been pretty mild against me. Is that going to continue? Can I safely farm this turn next to Heather, or is Heather going to come after me? And there's this really fun dynamic there with that. I just absolutely love Village Pillage. I've played that in the last couple of years, probably more than anything else, because I use it in class a lot. I use that and For Sale so much in class.
That's another one that I remember playing just with Will at a convention and being like, meh.
So
which For Sale?
No, Village Pillage.
Oh, Village, yeah, because
I've only played it once,
people,
just with 2 people.
you don't really have that same thing, but just adding that third player suddenly creates such a dynamic. I think it's best at 4, but it still plays well with 3, and everything still functions at 3.
So these games that we're talking about too, they're not like best at 3 necessarily. They're maybe all of them are just like functional at 3, right?
I have one that I think is best at 3. This is I don't know if people agree with me. Jay, why don't you go first?
Well, okay, I was going to say Alan Moon and Aaron Weisberger, San Marco, another game with an absolutely beautiful board, but it's basically kind of a take on the I cut and you choose. So it's a 3-player game, and there are different like lots that are created by the active players. So Heather might be the one who is setting up these 3 portions of resources, and Michael drafts first out of them, I draft second, and Heather knows that they're going to be left with whatever the last one is. So you're trying to make the last one the most palatable possible. Mentioned this with the game Piece of Cake, which I think Heather had mentioned. There was a pizza one kind of like that too. Mm-hmm. But this one has a lot more resource allocation and area control, and it feels far more Euro than Piece of Cake or the pizza one does. So this one, I think, plays fantastically at 3, and I tried it once at 4, and I'm like, nope, I've got plenty of other games that play well at 4. I will pull this out as a 3-player game. But it was really, so it came out in the, I can't remember, but you've got BGG up there. I think it was the late 90s or the early aughts, in the early wave of games that came over in the Rio Grande Ravensburger sort of wave. Back in the time where it had all the different language descriptions on the back of the box because you weren't sure which country it was going to be ported to, but the same edition would be sent everywhere.
It says 2001 on BGG.
So I was very, very close, late 90s, early aughts. Yep. Fantastic game, though. Hard to find. I don't know if it's still in print or has been reprinted, but if people can find a digital or physical copy of that, it's really worth checking out.
Yeah, it's actually, as I'm looking at the picture of it, it makes me think of somebody's game that they've brought to Protospiel called Bridge Nights. Because it's about building bridges. So it's like, oh, look at these pieces. You should consider that.
That's a game that I feel like would work well at 3 too. And I think what we're getting at, or at least one of the things we're unpacking here, is that games with take that mechanics, where you want to focus on the person in the lead, can work well at 3 players, because there's this natural climbing on top of each other, pulling the leader down mechanic, where if it's just 2 people, it's just 2 of you butting heads, and the person that's better at take that naturally establishes a lead and runs away with it. But with 3 people, there's like a self-balancing act of no one able to get too far ahead before someone grabs their leg and pull them back. And that's how Bridge Nights feels. When we played that, it was everyone would clearly attack the person in the lead, but only until someone else was in the lead, and then they jump on that person. And so we were all, an uneven and odd number of players seems to work really well at that count. Mm-hmm. And I think I hear that in some of the examples that you were talking about, Heather, where it didn't feel that good at 2 because it was just 2 people butting heads, quid quo, this tick for tat. But at 3 or more players, it felt better because of the chaos it spread. Is that, do you, I don't know, does that feel right?
Yeah, I mean, just that it wasn't so one-dimensional. If there was another, if you could go back and forth between the person you were attacking and what you had to consider. And I guess in a way, what you're saying about Village Pillage is the same. When there's only this one dimension of the person that you're paying attention to, it's kind of boring. But when you're juggling 2 different minds that you're competing against, or 2 different sets of positioning, like in Glooks, it's more interesting. Mm-hmm.
So you said that you had a game in mind, Michael, as what you thought played especially well with 3. What was that?
Yeah. So some of you may have heard of a game called Gloomhaven. It's fairly well known in the hobby game system. So have either of you played much of this game before I over-explain it?
I've actually never played it, even though I backed Frosthaven. So.
Oh, hey! This is a first for me. I think I'm the only one that's played this game in our group here. I'm sure any hobby gamers have at least heard of this game.
Right.
It is
Totally.
like legacy is the right term. It's a game where you play with a set of people. It has some light role playing, but it's basically scenario based, where you and some friends will try and work together to defeat a scenario, a set of obstacles, usually monsters and some conditions you're trying to overcome. It has an incredible amount of customization. It's a big box with a lot of pieces in it, and it plays from 1 to 4 players. But the 2 player version of the game, and I'll commend the designer. I don't have to brag on this game. People tend to consider it a pretty good game, but I will commend the designer because it works. It works at all player counts, 1 to 4, which is a really hard thing to do when you consider how much more weight the players get, depending on how many of them are playing at once. And not only that, but it works at different player levels. As you play the game, your character can level up and they get significantly more powerful. And you can play the game with someone that's played it 9 weeks in a row with someone that's playing it for the first time. And Gloomhaven will self-balance the difficulty of the scenario to the level of the players and to the player count.
So are you saying it's scenario based? So if the first time you sit down and play it is with 3 people, but next week one of your buddies is sick, could you still play it with 2 players and then play scenario 3 with 4 players? And would it be able to adapt that way as well?
It does. It's incredibly adaptable. I've played a session with 4 players, and then later on that same day kept one of those players, dropped 2 more, and picked up a third to play a 3-player version of it. And it balances to the player count, the player familiarity, and the player level. But I think it works best at 3. It's crazy. It's crazy that they set it up this way. And the reason I think it works so well at 3 is at 2 players, it is it's a cooperative game, but there's a lot of arguing going on because there's a tendency to over-optimize your partner. At least I have that tendency. You really have to work together well at 2 players to win. And I think the difficulty is just a little bit too hard at 2 players. And at 1 player, you're just playing 2 characters at once, which is too much for me. It hurts my brain. But at 4 players, it feels too long because the game has basically the same set amount of rounds regardless of player count. Lots of games scale length to player count, but this one doesn't. And so Gloomhaven feels like it has the right amount of player interaction. It absolutely scales the difficulty correctly to 3 players, and the duration is really good with 3 players as well. And so it's hard to put my finger on exactly why, but everything kind of balances in right at 3 players, and in my experience. And I think that's unique because, to Heather's point, a lot of games don't seem to have that as a focus. A lot, like you said, Jay, a lot of games are 2 or 4 and will just kind of make it work at 3. Gloomhaven to me feels like a game that was meant for a 3-player D&D adventuring party that turned into a tabletop game, and then they scaled it to work at 2, 1, and 4. I'd be curious to know if that's actually how it started, but that's how it feels, and it plays really, really well, really tight at that player count. And again, in my experience, I've probably played it at 3 players 4 or 5 times, and I like it that way best.
Well, that's interesting because, I mean, for a lot of the games, well, X-Wing was just straight up 2-player head-to-head, and I really didn't care how it was going to play at 3 or 4 players. I was focused on making sure it was a fun head-to-head game and that you would have a point count that you could take into a tournament. And I knew that designers after me would then crack the larger
player counts,
multiplayer. But a really interesting thing is I worked on Chaos in the Old World. I did the expansion Horned Rat. So Eric Lang did this really, really balanced asymmetric game where each player has a different set of powers and victory conditions that are very, very different. And it really only plays best at 4 with the core game. And it really only plays best exactly at 5 when you add the expansion. As soon as you take one of those characters out, it's like taking a leg off of a tripod. The rest of it can't support itself because there's a certain power dynamic and a certain action economy that's expected or that takes place when it's playing with the optimum number of players. So it's really interesting that I don't even think it's intended or cared at whether or not people try 2 or 3. If you play it that way, that's your problem, buddy. It's really a 4-player game.
And I realized I didn't actually mention the design mechanics and how it works at different player counts, and I think that's interesting. So I should just throw it out. What the game does is there's a scenario board that tells you where to place the enemies and the challenges and things that you're trying to lay out. And there's a little there's a hex around every place where you would set something. So like here's a place where you might put this type of enemy. And around that hex, there's 3 positions that represent 2, 3, and 4 player game setups. And so whether or not you put an enemy on this square and what type of enemy and how powerful that enemy is different if you're looking at the 2, 3, or 4 player setup. And so what you have is a single map that has unique scenario setups for 2, 3, and 4 player counts, all laid out in this really clean, simplified way. And so it lets you set up with basically thought out placements of difficulties to overcome for these different player counts. And I think that's why it works so well at different player counts and why it works so well at 3, as opposed to just saying enemies do 20% less damage or something like that. It actually thinks about the placement and the type of what you're dealing with for each player count. And I think that's a really good system.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and talking about a cooperative game that would be better at 3, this one is kind of an asterisk because I haven't played it at 3, but it's a recently delivered Kickstarter from North Star Games, and kind of fun to give them a shout out because the co-founder of North Star Games was one of the founders of Protospiel, Dominic Crapuchette. So this is their new release, and it's a deduction game where it actually, if either of you ever played Telepathic, Karl Klutsky's Telepathic at Protospiel, it's very well known at Protospiel. It was a project he was working on for a few years. It's mostly a 2-player deduction game, but it's like, I know what I want, and I know what my goal is, and you know what your goal is, and then I'm going to place something on the board to try and communicate to you what my goal is. And in this case, you're doing it rapidly over and over again, whereas Telepathic is there's like a pattern you're trying to create, and if you create it, you win. But with this one, it's like I have a whim card, and it's constantly changing like a whim. So the tiles that you're placing have both a type of, like, a color of rose and a shape of bush. So the bushes are like the card suits, like diamond shaped, heart shaped, etc., and then like 4 colors of roses. And so your different cards would say like either easy or it's always color. Medium could be color, or shape. And hard could be either of those 2 plus shape to color. So like I want a heart next to a red, could be on the hard. And I guess it's kind of hard to explain unless I show you, like, unless you're looking at the pictures, but it clicks really quick when you're looking at it. The thing is, when you're playing with 2 people, you can't really talk about what's happening on the board at all. You can't think out loud because you don't want to give any hints about what is your whim. And so playing 2 is kind of aggravating. Like we were playing a learning game, so we're trying to like just understand, how does this work without cheating, even though it's a cooperative game. And if you had 3 people, me and Michael could talk about how Jay just placed. Like, why do you think Jay did that? Do you think he's trying to make it clear such and such? Or whatever, you could talk about it. But when just Will and I were playing, like every question or everything we asked or said to each other felt like cheating. So I haven't actually played it with 3 to verify that it's fun at 3. It's in general fun. Can confirm in general fun and interesting. I got the deluxe version, and it's very pretty with like acrylic tiles and stuff.
So bringing that up made me think of party games, because party games are an interesting area. And Dominic designed Wits and Wagers, which is an incredibly popular party game that is interesting because it scales very well based on a wide number of people. And it's a trivia-based game that doesn't require that you know any trivia. It just requires you to be able to best guess who might know the answer and try to get closest to them. So it's really interesting that some party games, and then one of my favorite games to introduce to people who aren't gamers, but I want to give them some sort of experience, would be Hoopla by Cranium. It's in the Cranium line. And it's basically all the little cranium tasks like drawing or acting out or doing all of these things to get people to guess. But it's everybody against a timer. So you're all working together and it's got a frantic feel to it. But since you're playing against the timer, if somebody isn't able to get the guess out, it doesn't feel like overly punitive against a single person. We're all in it together. Oh, just 2 minutes went off the clock, or we've got to pass this one. It's going too much. Thanks, Mike, you did your best. But now, Heather, it's your turn. Roll the die. And it's just absolutely fantastic. But you've got to know pop culture a little bit. It didn't work as well with our kids. So we actually just made a homebrew version that our kids could play using references that they would understand.
Oh, interesting. What I remember about Hoopla is it's a party game you can play with 2 people, basically.
Yeah, you could do that as well since it's against the clock. But I've yet generally played it with 3, 4, or 5, and I've enjoyed it with each player count.
Yeah, I had a friend that liked to play party games, but we didn't have, when I was in high school, we didn't have another friend that wanted to play with us cranium type games. So Hoopla was like, oh, score, even though it sounds ridiculous to say play a party game with 2 people, but for real, it's like a party game. And
I'm trying to imagine how that works. That's crazy.
So
I'm also,
I was going to say, are there any social deduction games that work well with 3? Because the roles would be cut down so much. But then I was thinking Love Letter. Love Letter is really meant for a smaller group than a larger group, isn't it? Because I've only played Love Letter a handful of times. I don't know about the 2 of you.
Me too. When I played it, it was with 3.
Yeah, but I remember playing it with smaller counts than One Night Ultimate Werewolf or Resistance or some of those other social deduction games.
Yeah, those are definitely designed for bigger player counts.
I think you were about to say something, Michael.
Oh, no, I was just regretting not bringing Gloomhaven up here to have a chance to try and throw out my back to show it to the camera like we've been showing all the other games. And also, I could have actually demonstrated the thing for 3-player setups. That was clever. But I never think about bringing stuff up because I come straight from work to this, and so there's not like that mental in-between break to prepare.
It's called Yesterday.
That's a lot of forethought. I don't have that much.
Well, here, I'll show you a big, heavy box.
Yeah.
Let me not have...
And after Heather gets that, do we want to try and see if we can't summarize all of this advice into like what players should do?
Ooh.
Excuse me. Whoa, that is a big, heavy box. Have you talked about this one yet? I know you had. Yeah, that was in the list.
I haven't talked about it yet. And I don't know. Do you think this is... I think this is still smaller than Gloomhaven, though. From pictures.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Gloomhaven is at least twice the size of that. It's nuts.
It's crazy.
It is ridiculous. It makes me think of the coffin games that FFG used to put out with like Twilight Imperium and all the ones where they were one of the first $100 MSRP games in the market.
I'll show it off on another episode. I have to show you the laser cut wood thing I got for Christmas for it last year.
Yeah, that probably makes it easier to fit it in, right?
Yep.
So this game has different set of rules for every player count.
Oh, that's cool.
Interesting.
And like the 2 and 4 player is pretty similar because you just turn it into a team instead of one-on-one, right, head-to-head. I've only played this twice. It's one of those games that it's got a really huge board, takes up the whole table. It has this thing is in the middle, and when you're playing it, there's this plastic tower that grows out of this part. And maybe I can grab the piece and show you what they're like. But if you're playing 2 players, the theme of this game is your inner emotions, somebody's inner emotions. And so it's the negative emotions against the positive emotions. Like you could be malice versus like love, and really very interesting, really very beautiful art and cool minis in this. Like I think it came automatically. It came with cardboard cutouts, but you could get the cool minis. And it's not from Cool Mini or not.
I'm gonna take notes.
But there's, so there's this tower that's growing. This is the positive emotion pieces and the negative emotion pieces, the gloomy blue pieces, right? But if a third player plays, they are seeking balance. And so I did play it 3-player with Will and another friend of ours. And yeah, it has to be like a thing you plan ahead and you do it all day. And Will was balanced, and he just completely obliterated us. And after playing that, like basically that whole day was just a learning game to go like, okay, if we're positive and negative emotion, we have to be really cognizant of balance and both be making sure to whack balance constantly, or balance has a advantage. Yeah, so
that's interesting.
Like if you win, you'll be the one who puts the pyramid on top.
Okay.
On the very interesting, like the Christmas angel top of the tree.
Yeah.
Cornerstone.
It's interesting because
game.
I have gone into games trying to specifically design a 3-player and solely a 3-player game, based on Greek mythology and the fact that Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades are all brothers, and it's when they're vying for who gets which domain. And it's a game that I've been working on for like 10 or 11 years. It's one of those kind of, I guess, wishing well games that every once in a while I'll pull it up and I'll take a look at it and go, nope, still don't have any ideas on how to take care of that. And then I'll put it back for a few months, and then I might see something that sparks an idea, and I'm like, oh, all right, let's take a look at this. Nope, that still didn't work. But I guess it's a bucket list item now, is I want to be able to get that game to work, and only for 3 players. I'm specifically trying to do that as a challenge.
So what tips would you give to designers trying to make a game for 3 players? Any suggestions they should take if that is their initial goal?
I think it kind of goes back to what we had talked about earlier regarding the ganging up issue, not only during the game itself, but does your game have the number of decisions or the type of decisions that are going to put people in a kingmaker position? Because that's not a fun position to be in. And if it's starting to get that way, is there a way for them to get back into it? So the runaway leader syndrome and the kingmaker aspect were the two that I caution to look out for. And, if you see it once in a playtest, that might be an aberration. You're not really sure. But if you start to see that multiple times, that could be a trend. And then you have to take a look at, all right, is the game long enough for people to be able to do it? Or is it too long? And that's why the person is able to get the lead that they have. But it's challenging to do, but it's a fun thing to design for. So I would keep everything else super simple. How many cards should they draw on their turn? 3. How many actions should they get? 3. How many points should that thing be worth? 3. And just give everything some arbitrary default value and stick with it through a couple playtests, and you will find out very, very quickly if that is the right amount for that particular scoring vehicle or resource management or action economy in your game. That's what I tend to do with a lot of player ranges, but particularly if I've got a game that I already know works with 4 and I'm trying to make sure it also works with 3, I take a look at what made it especially good with 4 and see, all right, what does that mean that I have to either cut out or alter in order for it to also work with 3? Or do I just have to accept that it is not going to be, in my opinion, as strong a 3-player experience as it might be with 4 or 5? But I'd be curious what the two of you would look for specifically in a 3-player game that you'd want to see or not see.
Well, I want to say about, I don't know what kind of game you're thinking of for that 3 Greek gods thing, but I know somebody, again, Joachim in our audience has, I don't know if Joachim is watching today on Twitch, but is a regular watcher and also part of our Protospiel Online community, has this game called Eterna that I think hasn't been published yet, but it's it looks like it's an abstract game where there's 3 different elementals that all move in different ways, and they're trying to, I think it's area control from the video that I'm watching. So is it like an area control thing you're trying to build?
It's a trick-taking game where everybody has a different distribution of cards, so that it's difficult to determine. Hades has extremely low cards and extremely high cards, but nothing in the middle. Where others have different ones, and certain cards have like a trumping ability, and I'm like, 3-player trick taking is really, really tough. Anyway,
Yeah.
but I know there's a game in there. I know something can work in there. I just haven't found it yet. Maybe somebody out there will.
Yeah, so this one is very positional. That's a very different kind of thing. So I've actually not play tested it. I don't know if either of you happen to have play tested it, but
I've not played that one of Joachim's games before.
Yeah. But what would I be looking for in a 3-player game? I guess just evenly distributed attention to give each of the other 2 people that I'm playing with, which could mean a lot of different things, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know. What you said sounds good. I guess I would add that you should incentivize players if there is a target to target the person in the lead and not the person in the bottom to prevent that pile-on mechanic where one person gets shoved out of the game. Make sure
that means then, from a design standpoint, is it needs to be clear to everybody what in the lead means.
Yep.
If it's a victory point track and it's a point salad game, that's pretty easy. But if it's going to be the person who, like in Seven Wonders, there's so many different ways to score that in the moment, halfway into the game, you might not have a sense of who's really in the lead. So having a strong sense of being able to look at the board position and get a good understanding of where people are positionally is extremely helpful, particularly for 3-player, for exactly the reason that Michael just brought up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Or keeping who's in the lead secret can help not have that pile on the lower or higher person. It's just like a sense of who's in the lead and everybody's dealing with the same thing.
That sounds like Tigris and Euphrates.
I don't know if this is a good idea, but I've played a few games 3-player that were fun in that the end condition was dependent on the players. Players had a way to influence when the game ended. Super simple example would be Dominion. One of the end conditions is when a certain number of piles is gone. Another end condition is when all of one pile is gone. And players have a way to influence that end condition. I think that is especially interesting at a 3-player count because one player might be pulling towards a long, slow game with accumulation, some kind of engine building that gets more points over time. And other players can combat that by trying to hasten the game's end. And I've found that to be a lot of fun as long as it's not completely unexpected. You have to watch the power on that. I play tested the game the other day where I ended the game. I was able to do something that made the game end about 7 turns sooner than everyone expected, and it just felt bad for everyone. So it has to be a little bit predictable, but I like being able to influence that game end. And that lets people try different strategies and then try and end the game on their terms. And again, it makes a really good push and pull between the 3 different players that isn't just a face-off.
Yeah, I enjoy a variable game ending too. Works especially well when there are variable win conditions or victory conditions. Well, we're starting to get toward our hour mark. So what do you want to do next year, Heather? How do you want to wrap things up?
I don't know. Well, Michael doesn't have to leave like right at the hour, but we can do a really quick rift on
the luxury.
Yes. Flexibility.
Boardgamizer challenge. You wanna maybe take 5 minutes and do a Boardgamizer challenge?
That's always fun.
Okay.
And I've always kind of like gotten excited and jumped the gun a little bit, so I'll keep quiet and let Michael present his idea.
I'm a little slower. Give me a second, and I'll see if I can come up with something. I don't think I'm very good at this yet. I'm learning. While we're doing this, chat, if you're here and you want to answer a question or ask us a question, let us know in the chat, and we'll do the questions game. If there's someone here that wants to answer one of those questions, just give us a wave, and we'll throw those out and let you pick, even if it's just one of you. Okay, so board game design idea generator. Mechanics, trading. Oh, that's right. I was like, what do you mean mechanics? I was thinking what our mechanic today is, but our mechanic is 3 players, which is not a mechanic. It's a different condition. Okay, so trading, help the most players. a theme of community or oh my gosh, I have an idea for this. Okay, so this is actually building on an idea that I had for a game that didn't go anywhere. It was mostly just pen on paper, but I wanted to create a Gift of the Magi style game where all of the players were trying to get as many other players to get the gift they wanted for the holidays as possible. And the way you would do this is everyone had a skill set or like you might be a carpenter or you might be a sewer or some kind of artisanal craft. And it was a deduction. It was a deduction game around. The idea was a deduction game around hidden information that was cooperative. And the goal was to get as many people as possible to get the gift that they wanted. And so it was everyone else winning. And the way you played it is you all had information about what you wanted, and you were trying to exchange information with other people to get the right pieces of the presents to other players. And so you were communicating not verbally, but by trading information, like aspects of a present, like a trendy or a hipster, and then it might be a wood carving or a kitchen appliance, and trying to build this combination of words that would make up the perfect gift for someone else. And so I actually think that fits this list pretty perfectly, which is wild.
Well,
Can
and
you pull that list back up?
would
yeah,
it be so mechanics, trading,
the,
theme,
the
community,
so
alternate
community is the theme. Yeah.
yeah.
Help. Yeah, and the goal was to help as many people as possible win. So that there was no self-scoring. There was communal scoring. How many points did the table as a whole get? How many gifts were you able to complete? And the idea was I wanted to make a game around a feeling instead of a mechanic or a theme. And the feeling I wanted to create was the feeling of being understood by other players. And and so and it hasn't gone anywhere because it turns out that's really hard to do. But I actually think it fits this really well, and it makes me want to pick that back up and play with it more. It's like trading and sharing information to create the sense that other people understood you, and then helping other people actualize their goals. So
And it's
there's
also
my idea.
playable by a 10-year-old, which was the last
Absolutely.
extra constraint. So
Yeah.
would it be like the Gift of the Magi in the sense that it's what you have to do to make sure other people get their gift? It makes it quite likely you'll be giving your gift up.
Yeah. So it was like a self-sacrificial thing where you start with something, and the only way to meet other people's goals is to give what you have away. So you're literally giving away what other people need to win. And there's no incentive for you to get anything. The incentive for you to have your gift met is completely in the other player's hands. So you have no self-interest in your own gift. And that was more of the Gift of the Magi tie-in than the bittersweet you lost because you won story. But the idea was that you were not at all self-focused. So in the Gift of the Magi, they didn't care about the present they were getting or the cost of the present for someone else. They just wanted to get the perfect thing for somebody else based on that relationship they had. And so that was kind of the motivator. Was you don't care about what gift you get, but everyone else does, and everyone else wants you to win, and you want everybody else to win. Hard thing to gamify, but a really fun thing to work on.
So the idea that I came up with, and I was trying to come up with something snappy, rhyming with or with consonants of Pirates of the Caribbean, but I think it's Pirates of Lake Michigan. So it's pirates, but they're really, really, really small ships. So they can't actually carry any of their loot by themselves. They need to team up with other people to be able to both plunder a location. Like if we wanted to plunder the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, then we would have to work on it together. And then whatever loot that we got, we would have to figure out a way to organize. And maybe it's so heavy that halfway through delivery, Michael and I are trying to chug this thing along to port it at Milwaukee, and Heather comes up, and we can get there faster if we're willing to give Heather a split or a part of the treasure. So it's something that you literally cannot do by yourself. You can do faster when there are more of you involved, but then each share is likely to be smaller. So are you more content helping a few people in a large way or a lot of people in a small way. And so you've got to try to balance that while you're scoring, along with the paths there. But I also just think that it'd be funny to have pirates on the high seas of Lake Michigan, which I visited quite a many times growing up in southeast Wisconsin.
I love the image of like 5 pirates showing up, and they're just on kayaks, and they
I was
have
thinking the paddle boats, right?
Yes,
So like
little
they're
feet thing.
paddling furiously.
And they have this like 52-inch screen TV, but it's sinking the paddle boat, so they have to support it between the 4 of them so that they don't go under.
I was actually thinking it would be interesting if you had a ship that had little slots on it we could place next to each other, and then the good is a length of wood that we have to lay down that literally covers all of ours. So if somebody else comes up, we've got to figure out, can they slide in under there? Or maybe, we've got something that Heather, Michael, and I are all bearing the weight of, but then there's a smaller piece that only Michael and Heather are carrying along the way as well. So there's kind of like an optimization thing. But
like if too many people pull off from carrying it, it literally falls into the water because it's not supported anymore.
Yeah, so this game is played in a bathtub. It's very, very expensive because it's all based on actual weight and water displacement and things like that. So it'll be pricey, but I really think it'll be worth it when it comes out.
I actually picture like all the pirates being like animals. When for some reason when you talk about that, you say Pirates of Lake Michigan, I picture like ducks with pirate hats or something like that.
I was thinking with the bathtub thing because I had Pirates of Porcelain, but that didn't sound right. But to make it kid friendly, it's all played with rubber duckies.
Oh yeah.
And so that would be
with an eye patch. Yeah.
I've got several rubber ducks staring at me, not far from here. But
that's great.
Like that would be fun to be able to do as a prop.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well, we didn't get anybody raising their hand saying they want the Q&A.
We'll save those for another day then.
A rainy day fun.
We picked the right kind of mini game to play here at the end then.
Nice.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Any other shout out to any game that anybody's played lately or anything else pop culture that our audience would love to hear about?
No, that Paint the Roses is the most current thing going on in my game collection right now. So
what are we talking about next week, Heather? What should people look forward to?
Oh, that's a good question. Six-sided dice.
Yeah.
Six-sided dice. So.
I had a dream about six-sided dice the other night, and it was the greatest game I've ever made, and it just fell out of my ear when I woke up at 4 a.m. So maybe these two can help me patch it back together when we do the game idea with the six-sided die mechanic.
So do you want to focus on games that use solely six-sided dice or games that feature six-sided dice? And are you talking standard or custom? Because I love me my custom dice. So
I'm thinking custom or standard.
But games where dice are at the forefront, right? Where that's the like Monopoly would not be a good fit because it's just a little piece of the game.
There's a couple of games like you, Michael, were asking one of our Discords about roll and writes for inspiration about this, and I gave you a big list. So that we were primed for next week.
We're ready to go.
But after giving you those, I was like, well, there's some others though that are really coming to mind as like dice are a very central part of how this whole thing works. But custom or pips or whatever numbers written on them. I don't have a lot of dice that have the number 2 written on a face though. Generally, it seems like it's pips or icons. In my world.
Jotting down some ideas right now.
And I'm looking forward to talking to you about them next week.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, thanks
That'll be fun.
Yep, and tonight we don't have a Protospiel tested. The next time we'll be live on Twitch is next week for that table talk with six-sided dice. So we'll see everybody next time. Bye.
All right.
Basta.